Welcome, welcome, welcome to Wealth Strategies Unleashed with Concenture Wealth Management. I'm Robert Gilliland, and I want to say thank you for joining us this week. This week's going to be a lot different than most of our normal podcasts that we go through and do. I am very, very, very lucky to have Dr. Gina Pritchard with us with the Prevent Clinics up in Frisco, Texas. And so, Gina, thanks for joining us.
And Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here.
We're going to have some fun here. So, I think it makes a lot of sense to let our listeners and people who watch us on YouTube know why we're doing something that we're doing right here, which is on health. And going through and looking at this, when it comes to managing people's wealth span, a lot of times we can go through and manage money, and if we know exactly the day that someone's going to die, and if they want their last check to bounce, managing the money is really, really, really easy, right? But the thing that I found really interesting is if you go and you think about a graph or a chart, the x-axis, we all have a lifespan that may or may not be influenced by genetics. But then you have this health span, and that's really with your quality of life. And really what we're finding out is a lot of people can do a lot of things to increase their health span, and our job is to help increase their wealth span. And the way that I came to know Dr. Gina here is I had a friend probably 3 years ago, be 4 years this May, that at a very young age died of a heart attack. A mutual friend of ours gave me a book called Beating the Heart Attack Gene. And in that, I came to meet Dr. Gina Pritchard and her group. And I think clients need to know about little things that they can do to help improve their health span and enjoy life. You work so hard accumulating this wealth. It's all about being able to to do this. And this is absolutely amazing to me. Even through COVID, the number one killer was heart attacks. 20% of all deaths are because of heart attacks. And there's some things that you can do and things that you can know and things that you can help to prevent it. And it doesn't mean you're eating kale for all the meals because, quite frankly, or seaweed, not big fans necessarily of each. But Dr. Gina, if someone were to say, tell me, how do I beat the heart attack gene, or what is the heart attack gene? What would you say?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Robert. And you are absolutely correct. There is so much you can do. And they are relatively small things that make a huge impact to, as you said, ensure that your health span matches your wealth span and your lifespan. You want to be very active right up to the last breath. And so I say that all of the years I spent in the hospital and in a traditional healthcare model, our evaluation was not incomplete. It was not inaccurate. It was just incomplete. So we need to know several more things about an individual to actually give them an individualized care plan and say, these are your contributors, these are your root causes, so to speak, and this is where you stand in terms of your future risk of heart attack, or if you've already had a heart attack, your risk of having another one. And we start one by one reversing those contributors. There are several things, and we'll talk about it on the podcast, that just are not evaluated in a traditional healthcare setting. There's not enough time. And the truly life-saving testing that somebody needs to prevent many diseases, but certainly to prevent a heart attack or a stroke, insurance just doesn't pay for, unfortunately, until someone has that diagnosis. Okay, then maybe they'll pay for some of them, but we need to I say every individual has the right and deserves to get any test that will give them peace of mind or power to live the life they want. And there's so much testing that's readily available to help you understand what's going on the inside.
So, it is a shame that those tests that prevent the big expenses are not necessarily covered, right? But so the thing that's interesting to me is there are people who come in that are physically fit, triathletes, marathon runners, people who consistently But that's not necessarily an indication that there's not heart attack looming, right?
That's exactly right. In fact, we have a story recently of a triathlete. I believe he was doing an Ironman, some sort of multi-type uh, competition, and began feeling ill at the end of the competition and was rushed to the hospital having a heart attack. And it was because of what we just said. He was very fit and led a very healthy life, but there were some things that were not evaluated. He lived, and now he wants to tell his story to everyone. And I hear that over and over again. Bob Harper, the celebrity fitness trainer, had a heart attack on the treadmill. I see patients in my practice that are athletes that start feeling uncomfortable when they're doing their practice bike ride or something, for example. So before you have your first symptom is the very best time to get the evaluation. But if you've already had a heart attack or a stent or bypass surgery, then now is also the very best time.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are actually before let's talk about this. In the book Beating the Heart Attack Gene, it talks about the cat in the cellar or a cat in the gutter.
Yeah. Right.
And what exactly does that mean, and what needs to happen to prevent that?
So glad you brought that up, because it's a little known, really, anatomy inside all of our bodies that isn't talked about enough, and it is the crux of where a heart attack begins. And so our colleague, Dr. Bradley Bale, describes it as a cat in the gutter. And what we're talking about is think of your blood vessel like a hollow tube, but it's like a noodle. You know, they're very flexible. It's a tissue. It's a pipe that carries blood to every cell in your body, but it's not like a PVC pipe. It's not only flexible, but it's an organ in and of itself. And the inside lining of that blood vessel, particularly arteries, everybody's probably heard of coronary arteries or coronary artery disease. That's talking about the blood vessels or arteries in the heart. But the arteries carry oxygen and nutrient-rich blood to every cell and every organ in our body. The brain and the heart, of course, being the most important. Those two organs can't live without an adequate blood supply for very long before this person is not going to survive,
Right.
or they're never going to be the same. So inside lining of these vessels, there are layers, and it's a dynamic process going on in these layers inside the blood vessel walls, where your body's constantly trying to just move the good nutrients and the oxygen along so it gets where it needs to go, but protect you from anything that should not go. And also, you can get what I call like a lesion or a little sore on the inside lining of the blood vessel from a whole host of things, many of them the things we've talked about, things that aren't being tested for. But if you have these dangerous things floating through your bloodstream, your body has several steps to protect you from them, but it can create a little lesion, a little wound on the wall of the artery, and that ultimately ends up being plaque or vascular disease or heart disease or atherosclerotic plaque, hardening of the arteries.
Right.
People
Okay.
call it a lot of. That's the cat in the gutter. When these toxins get inside that lining, they get trapped there. And it reminded Dr. Bale when he was traveling in Europe and was eating in a palazzo outside. They have these gutters that are in the concrete there where cats hide out, and they wait for a pigeon to get just close enough so that they can jump out of the gutter and grab the pigeon and have some lunch by eating that pigeon.
Right.
And it made him think of how when you get these toxins inside the lining of the blood vessel, it's like that cat that's trapped in there. Of course, the cat isn't trapped, but it's trapped in there, and your body wants to keep it there and stabilize it until your immune system isn't winning the war. And until something happens, too many variables, and this leaps out, so to speak, it can leak back into the blood vessel rather than being hidden in the wall of the artery. And when that happens, that's what leads to a heart attack quickly, or a stroke if the same thing is going on in your brain. Because when it leaks out, your body says, this is an emergency. We're going to put a blood clot on that and heal it right over. But the blood clot can get out of control. And let's say that lesion was causing a 20% or a 70% blockage at the time, but you didn't even know you had it. You were feeling fine. You were running a marathon.
Right.
If a little blood clot forms, then it can stop the flow of blood immediately, and the heart and the brain cannot survive that. So a cat in the gutter is like a lesion in the wall of the artery that can get out of control.
So how do you test for that? What are some of the? I mean, talk to a lot of people that go to their family practitioner and they say, I'm getting my physical, and they say, okay, we're going to do blood work. I'm not certain that they necessarily do take all the blood work that would be able to point this out. So what sort of tests should people be thinking about asking? How do they find out whether or not that cat's in the gutter?
Yes, such a great question. And so I have these categorized, and the place that I like to start is to look at every way possible, but certainly there are two main ways to look at your arteries to see if there's plaque in the artery. What's the status currently? Does everything look pristine in your blood vessels, or is there a little bit of plaque starting to build up? And then most importantly, is that plaque stable or is it unstable? There are various types of plaque. And two easy ways to do that are to simply go to a radiology center and get a CAT scan, either a CAT scan that gives you a coronary artery calcium score. Probably a lot of your listeners have had that done or have heard of that. It's become relatively inexpensive, a quick test. If there's calcium in an artery anywhere, but the coronary calcium score is looking specifically for calcium in the heart arteries. And if calcium is present in an artery, we know there is plaque there. So it answers the yes/no question. It doesn't matter if this person is 16 or 96. If there's calcium, they have plaque, they have atherosclerotic disease, vascular disease. That's one way, a CAT scan. There's a more in-depth CAT scan you can get that gives us much more detail, and that's called a coronary CT angiogram with artificial intelligence analysis. It's the greatest test that's come out in the last couple of years. And then the third way is to simply get an ultrasound of any blood vessel in your body. And we have the capability to look at the wall of the artery, like I was talking about earlier. Yes,
Right.
we want to know if the flow of blood is reduced, but we want to know the details around the wall of the artery. And we can get that at the carotid arteries here in the neck very easily and determine, is there blockage? And then what does that wall look like? So those three tests: ultrasound of the carotid arteries, looking at the walls, because if you just say a carotid ultrasound from your doctor, they'll get flow only. Say, no, I want to also know about the wall of the artery. That's actually called B as in boy, B mode ultrasound of the carotids. And then a coronary calcium score CT or a coronary angiogram CT. Those are the three top favorite, easy to get tests with the best information.
Is there any sort of blood tests or genetic testing that people should be thinking about that
Yes.
kind of in the normal course of going and getting your physical, that to know what and where things are?
Yes, absolutely there is. And so beyond the plaque analysis, then we want to know blood tests. We want to know how well are you sleeping and breathing all night long. That's another topic. And we want saliva testing. And so I can go into each one of those, but I'd love to just give you a list you can send out to your listeners or put a link maybe with this saying, these are the tests you need to ask your doctor for. And the blood work is a much more in-depth analysis of what's going on inside the body. Most all of us have heard about inflammation, and we throw that term around a lot, but there's a lot of inflammatory markers in the blood that help us know, is there inflammation in general? And specifically, is there inflammation in this individual that I'm looking at, their blood work? Is there inflammation in the wall of their arterial system? We can know that specifically. So it helps us understand if your risk and an individual's, if we're going in the right direction with an individual. If the inflammation in the wall of the artery is getting better, then we know their arterial health is getting better. So there's a host of inflammatory testing in the blood work. It's just a few tubes of blood. It sounds scary, but we get a lot of great information, not only inflammation, but looking at some of the micronutrients, the vitamins that are essential, looking at your hormone levels, looking at thyroid analysis in an in-depth way, understanding about electrolytes, kidney function, liver function. Your hematology or your blood count analysis can give us some clues. All of those things, one, not all of it's tested for. And then secondly, a lot of times you'll go to the doctor in the same way I used to treat in a traditional model. And we would say, your labs look good. We'll check them again in 6 months or 3 months or a year or whatever. if you understand, if an individual can understand in more detail exactly what those tests mean, and maybe we'll talk about this more later on, you can, it's a gold mine in there. You can know if all of your lifestyle strategies are actually helping you or they're working against you with some basic labs that you do get every year at the doctor, like those micronutrients. Some of them are tested for. Kidney function is tested for. Anyway, then I mentioned saliva test. Simply spit in a tube, mail it off. And there's a lot of stuff we can get now with saliva. Some of those things I mentioned, like hormones and thyroid and insulin and glucose, etc.
So
But
yeah,
our main reason,
I,
yeah,
we're talking about the heart attack.
yes.
What in the world does saliva tests have to do with that? Talk to me about why in the world do I need to do a saliva test?
Yes. So I'm going to preface it by saying probably most of us have heard about leaky gut, or GI health is so important. And a leaky gut or GI disturbance can start with an oral microbiome, which we're talking about gut microbiome when we talk about leaky gut. Your oral health can have a microbiome that's out of balance and unhealthy, and you're swallowing all of that, and that affects the GI tract. It gets into the bloodstream, and specifically, there are specific good bacteria and unhealthy organisms, healthy and unhealthy, favorable and unfavorable, in your saliva, in the mouth, in the gums, that you don't want to be swallowing, and you don't want them to get into the bloodstream. And Dr. Bell and Dr. Doneen and a Dr. Vigorous wrote a landmark paper on the pathophysiology of this. How does bacteria, for example, that it's not as simple as just bacteria, but there are some bacteria. Many of you may have heard of PG, which now more and more is coming out, that Porphyromonas gingivalis, one of these bacteria, is definitely implicated in brain abscess, in stroke, in dementia. And we know that PG and AA, there's 5 that are also implicated in heart attack and cardiovascular disease. And they get to the heart and get to the blood vessels because they're initially in the mouth. And there's 5 ways they can, and I won't take the time to go through it here, but physiologically, there's 5 different transport mechanisms, swallowing into the blood vessels, on and on through the GI tract, where they find their way to these blood vessels, and they are implicated in the wall of the artery where a heart attack, that lesion I was talking about,
Right.
that wound, rather than the body being able to take care of it, these bacteria overwhelm it and it becomes like a festering wound, if you will. That can rupture. That's a dangerous kind of plaque. And these bacteria were identified by Dr. Pesce years ago at the site of the heart attack, and they were alive and virulent and an active part of why somebody had a heart attack. That's one of the tests that every person needs to have evaluated that is not widely known or distributed. Just spit in a tube.
That is absolutely incredible. Now, we hear about people, right, that die in their sleep, and they had sleep apnea. The one who comes to my mind is Reggie White, right, the great defensive end from the Green Bay Packers. You said a sleep test. What does that have to do with my heart?
Yes. So we now know that most of us have heard about sleep apnea and someone unfortunately dying in their sleep because they quit breathing and didn't start again. And that's the worst case scenario of sleep apnea. But we now know it is a continuum of low quality circulation of oxygen during the night. Maybe it's because somebody they breathe fine if they're sleeping on their stomach, but they roll over to their back, and for whatever reason, they don't breathe as well on their back. Or they're interrupted by the dog, and so they wake up a lot and they're coughing and they have nasal congestion. There are so many things that contribute to even nuanced low levels of oxygen day and night, but especially at night. Most of us have heard a lot of influencers on social media talking about mouth taping and breathing through your nose. That's one way to improve your oxygen level all night long, because breathing through the mouth with people with all night long is low levels of oxygen. You tend to have periods of time where you're not breathing deeply enough, or you're not breathing slowly enough to really get good restorative sleep and get good oxygenation. That being said, what we need to identify now is where is someone on this continuum, children and adults, actually, because this can start in childhood with the development of the facial structures.
Right.
Either way, we need to know a better evaluation than just going to a sleep lab and seeing what happens one night in a foreign setting, and even more so than one night at home. Now we have a ring. Probably most people are familiar with the Oura ring, and that gives great data. But there's one even better to actually diagnose all of these variables we're talking about. And it's called a sleep image ring. And you put that together with an app called Empower Sleep and wear it for 30 days and nights. And from that, we can tell exactly what's going on. Yes, maybe it is full-blown sleep apnea. Maybe this person does need CPAP for a little while. CPAP is not a great long-term option for most everybody. But either way, it can be an intervention that's helpful. So we can get the nuanced information we need to say, here's the next step, and here's the next step, and here's the next step. Because high levels of oxygen day and night, incredibly important. High quality oxygen through the nose.
And that lack of oxygen means that your heart and your brain is not getting enough of the right type of blood, which can lead to heart attack or can lead to stroke or can lead to the body just not reacting the right way and processing things. Therefore, that clot ends up going to the brain and the stroke happens. Am I understanding that right?
You are understanding that right. I'd just like to elaborate slightly in that we will talk about, or maybe we'll talk about it now, about dementia, for example. Like what you just described is exactly what's happening with a heart attack and stroke. It's just finally the low levels of oxygen, whether it's small little reductions in oxygen or it's a long period of no oxygen, like with sleep apnea and stopping breathing in the middle of the night. The blood vessels first can't survive that, but then they try to recover. But the heart can't survive that, and the brain can't survive that. So small doses over time, it damages the heart and the brain. Large doses more frequently, more quickly. But in the brain, I wanted to talk about that there are identified by Dr. Bredesen and others have in that space, in that area of expertise, have identified the areas of dementia. And one of them is like the brain getting too many toxins and not enough of the nutrients that they need. That's actually two categories, a toxic category and a malnourished category. The brain and the heart could both fall into that category in terms of it's got to get what it needs. I say the brain is a diva. She's going to have, or he's going to have what he needs and what he wants. They need these nutrients. And oxygen is one of them. And too much of the toxins get in there if you don't have high levels of oxygen. That's just one way to describe it. In case people want to know, I don't want to leave them hanging, but the other categories, so there's toxic, there's lack of nutrients that are needed for nourishment. There's one called glucose toxicity, which is really diabetes. That's another continuum. Sometimes people just have little variances in insulin resistance, for example, or in communication between insulin and glucose. That's damaging to the brain, damaging to the heart. So that's glucotoxicity. And then the fourth one would be just the inflammation category we talked about. A lot of things contribute to that. And lastly, traumatic brain injury. So that is stand on its own, but it makes any of those worse. And then I'm sorry, I said lastly, then in a category all of its own is actually vascular dementia. And there are some people that are identified as only having vascular related dementia, which is the same thing as having vascular disease of the heart. It's just they notice it in the brain first with memory difficulties or can't do math like I used to, or some people call me and want an evaluation because they have to do a lot of problem solving for their job and they can't do it anymore. Those can be clues that you have vascular dementia or another type and need some additional testing, really, which we haven't talked about today, but it's readily available.
So the solution is a lot more than just start exercising, right?
Oh, so much more. So much
and
more.
So
we'll say, go ahead.
Well, I mean, so what should people be? What should be that process? What should people be thinking about?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you mentioned a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned sleep tests. You mentioned the saliva test. You said about glucose, and I'd love to have you back on for another one to talk about diabetes and glucose and insulin and stuff like that.
Yes.
When we go and we think about these things, to me it's very, very interesting that you think that heart attack, the number one killer, is actually related to a lot of the other killers. So what obviously we need to get our blood work. What should people be doing other than just start walking or start exercising?
Yes, so there is a lot of data, and a lot of it is housed on the American Heart Association website, indicating that really 80% of heart attacks and strokes could be eliminated. Even you'll see very clearly on the American Heart Association website, heart attacks are preventable, strokes are preventable. Well, then everybody's like, okay, what do we do? Yes, I love getting nuanced and telling the individual sitting in front of me in the exam room, this is exactly what you need to do, because we've looked at all this testing. But everybody listening to the podcast can start down this path by changing a few things. One is, we talked about, you don't want too many toxins going to the brain and heart, and you don't want too many, you want to be now malnourished. So start with, I say, 3 simple rules with your diet. And this American Heart Association would back this up. I say the American Heart Association recommendations are even a little bit wimpier. Number 1, start with real food. Like if it's meat, if it's vegetables, if it's fruit, if it's nuts, if it's seeds, if it's a healthy oil, and that includes butter, it includes dairy products. If you handle whole fat dairy products, okay, that's one that can be iffy. But real food, nothing in a box, nothing in a can, unless you absolutely have to, frozen vegetables, canned vegetables, whatever, with a healthy amount of protein. So real food, spice it up with healthy spices and herbs, a healthy oil if you're going to cook it in oil, and then don't do a whole lot more to it. Dr. Lustig, who is a pediatric endocrinologist that got fed up with pediatric diabetes that could be, he says it's not druggable, it's foodable. These children are being fed food that has had too much done to it.
Right.
He's like, it's not the food, it's what we've done to the food. So don't bread it, don't put grains on it, don't eat grains with it. Nobody needs grains. They need meat, vegetables, fruit, and maybe some dairy, healthy oils. Number 2, besides real food, is get enough protein. Most of us eat carbs, and we're all afraid of meat, which is really flipped upside down. We need plenty of protein, high quality protein, and everybody can use 1 gram of protein, and you can find it on, just look up beef, how much protein in 3 ounces of beef, and it'll give you the grams. Like an egg, for example, has 6 grams. Everybody needs 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight on a daily basis. Ideal body weight. So if you need to gain muscle, you need to eat more protein. If you need to lose fat, but most of us it's not really losing fat as much as it is build muscle and eat the right food, and you'll lose the fat and gain muscle. Either way, whatever your ideal body weight is, eat that many grams of protein in a day. So real food, eat protein. And then lastly is, if you're going to have any carbohydrates, even if it's fruit, put it at the end of the meal. Have protein and fat in there first. Don't just, eat. Let's even a banana. A lot of people put a banana in a good healthy protein shake. They really should have some of that protein shake first without the high carb of even a banana, and then eat some banana later or after they get protein and fat in their belly. Think of it like drinking a Coke on an empty stomach. It's just going to go straight to sugar, and the blood sugar is going to spike, maybe up to 200. That's really the same thing that a banana, for example, or a high carb fruit can do. So put your carbs last after protein and fat.
So
number 2. Go ahead. You want to talk about nutrition?
Well, no. So So if I have a big pot of spaghetti, I should eat the meatballs first and then the pasta, right?
That's right. That's unusual. I know. At least have a little bit of the meatballs first, and then have a meatball with a little bit of the pasta underneath it, or something. Yeah. Right.
I'm sorry. I interrupted you. You were on a roll, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. So.
I won't spend as much time on the other categories, but the American Heart Association finally in the last couple of years came out and added sleep and high quality sleep to these these 8 things that we need to do. So eat healthy, real food with plenty of protein. Get plenty of high quality sleep and breathe well all night long. Yes, move your body. And that's different for everybody. But we know at a minimum, a 20 to 30-minute walk every day, brisk, moderate exercise, not just a stroll, and doing something to build muscle definitely is associated with longevity. Not only that lifespan we all want, living to whatever you want to live to, 90, 85, 100. Think about what you want life to look at like at that age. There are a lot of people that are incredibly unhappy because they're in the bed or can barely move around at age 80, 70, right, less 95. So we need muscle now, and we need to maintain it throughout the rest of our life to keep from breaking a hip and to be active. Then the next thing is we do want to have healthy relationships and joy in life. If people are constantly mad that they're having to go work out, or mad that they're eating this way or whatever, or having to do it alone, just people in isolation, we know that lack of connection and joy in life, and an underappreciation for the spiritual aspect of life, whatever that means to you. I'm not trying to make any listeners here believe in God if they don't, but there definitely is a soul, and we need to feed our soul by connecting with others, by doing things that we enjoy, listening to music, reading poems, reading scripture, praying, whatever it means for you. So that aspect has plenty of hardcore research to support the fact that we can't leave it out. So we talked about, and then the others are don'ts, like don't smoke, don't have high blood pressure, which if you do all of these things, your blood pressure most of the time can be treated by treating all these other lifestyle factors. So that's it. As far as lifestyle, eat real food with plenty of protein, work out both 20 minutes a day, brisk exercise, and build some muscle, get high quality sleep, have fun with those you love. That's not a hard one, that's for sure. Be happier, find your bliss, especially if you can work with something that you love. If not, then after work, go do something you love.
You know, the thing I find so that's kind of hit me that to me is pretty incredible is that for someone like myself, prior to reading the book and prior to having conversations with you, I thought it was all about looking at what my cholesterol was, what my LDL and HDL cholesterol was, and I thought if I had that and I had that under control, check the box, keep on moving. Clearly, you know that you need to be moving and exercising and eat and everything else. But the reality is there's a lot more to it. And there's a lot of easy things that you can do that actually end up making it. And one point that I would make is it's really interesting. You talk about having healthy relationships. The average 65-year-old couple, first of all, life expectancy in this country is 77 and a half years, is where that is, right? But if you are 65 and married, there's a 50% chance that at least one of you is going to make it to age 90, right? And that's the reason why when we go through and we're doing our financial planning and stuff. So it does say having people that you can talk to, and that does the heart good too. As we kind of wrap this up, if there was one or two things that you wanted to make sure that people got from here, what would you say that it is that you think is important that affects that health span?
I would say, one, go back and review those lifestyle things, because you can start that today. You can throw out everything in a box that you have in the kitchen. You can start making those changes today. You can get outside today. So those things, you can laugh more today and work on, those important relationships in a healthy way. So I would say that would be number one. Number two is make note of these tests and just simply ask your doctor or your nurse practitioner, whoever you're seeing on a regular basis next time. Because more and more, these are trickling their way into traditional healthcare. And especially if you have someone who is, I call it a hybrid model, maybe they take insurance, but they also will do some of these prevention tests on the side if you're willing to pay for it. So at least get this list of tests and ask for them. One of the most important being something to understand where you are in terms of plaque, and a more in-depth blood evaluation to look for inflammation, evaluation to look for inflammation and some of these other key nutrients. And then thirdly, spit in a tube, get that saliva test. It's where you can get it available online now, and I can give you the resources for that. Most of it can be found at thepreventclinic.com. You can say, tell me more about the saliva test, or tell me more about the tests I need. It's on there.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Pritchard, thank you. This has been absolutely fantastic. I know people got a lot out of it. For our listeners, Dr. Gina Pritchard with the Prevent Clinic up in Frisco, and absolutely fantastic. Today was all about making it so that your health span makes it so that you can enjoy life, because we'll help you with the wealth span and making sure that you have a great time. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you, and we will see everyone next week.